Wife left me and came back with a baby, begging for a second chance. Am I the asshole for shutting the door in her face? You've heard the phrase, "I never saw it coming," repeatedly? For me, it was precisely that way. I was married to my wife for the entire 4 years that we were together. To be honest, I thought we were doing well. For the most part, I believed that we were in agreement and we had plans and a life plan laid out. The problem is that, at least in my opinion, we both desired children. As soon as we were married, we began to discuss it seriously. She would constantly talk about how she wanted 2 or 3 children, what we would name them, how we would furnish the nursery, and other details. She would even plan this life with our future children while browsing baby gear and clothing online. It kept us connected and was sort of our thing to talk about. Everything appeared ideal, and we were eager to begin this new chapter in our lives together. However, we received some terrible news that left me speechless. We visited a doctor to find out what was wrong after a few months of trying to conceive. To cut a long tale short, it was me. The doctor essentially informed us that our chances of naturally becoming parents were very limited because my count was much too low. It felt like a stomach punch. All those plans we had suddenly disappeared, and I felt worthless. I was really hit hard by the news. I ended up for a while in a fairly awful position. I was a complete disaster at first, but therapy ultimately helped. At first, she seemed to be rather supportive, stating that she would be content with just the 2 of us and that it didn't matter. However, there was something strange about the way she said it right from the start. She seems to have dropped it far too soon. She was talking about having a family one minute and then she was claiming that she didn't need children to be happy. Don't get me wrong, I understand that individuals have second thoughts, but her entire demeanor seems strange to me. She had stopped thinking about baby names and was now completely avoiding any conversation about children. Furthermore, it seemed as though she began to view me in a different light. She would suddenly start making little jabs at me that she had never said before, like how I wasn't taking care of myself or that perhaps I should work out or do more around the house. Indeed, I may have gained a few pounds, but it seemed like she was constantly looking for reasons to accuse me. She would dismiss it when I questioned her about the abrupt shift in attitude. She would claim that I was being unduly sensitive and that I was only dreaming. But I was aware of a problem. It was different with the lady I married, the one who would spend hours sitting with me discussing our future. She wasn't particularly cruel, but there was a certain coldness about her, as if she had already mentally checked out and was merely following the rules. I suppose that as time went on, I began to trust her when she assured me that everything was okay. In order to avoid coming out as needy or insecure, I quit pressing. In any case, after a few years, we were only getting by. We had gotten into a rut where we hardly discussed anything important. We seemed more like housemates than husband and wife. She would always dismiss my attempts to discuss other choices, such as adoption or surrogacy, by stating that she didn't want to consider them. "I'm happy as long as we're together," she would remark, but I never really understood. She seemed more concerned with persuading herself than I was. She suddenly tells me that she wants to go a girls' trip. She had gone on a few excursions with her friends before and I had always encouraged her to do so, so it wasn't strange for her to do so now. She had been talking for a time about wanting to travel to America with her pals, and we lived in Brighton. We had developed this trust over the years, so I didn't give it a second thought. I therefore made sure she had everything she needed, assisted her with packing, and drove her to the airport. I recall her final words before she departed. "Thank you for being so supportive," she added, turning to face me. She sounded so sincere that I dismissed it as her simply expressing gratitude, even though I found it a little strange that she would say that. It's not like I'd done anything really noteworthy. I remained up that night to make sure things went well by calling her when she landed. I kept myself occupied around the house, watching TV, keeping an eye on the time, and waited for her to text me to let me know that she had landed because her flight was expected to take roughly 9 hours. I called her to check in as soon as I noticed her flight had landed. The phone kept ringing, but nobody picked it up. I didn't give it much thought because I assumed she was exhausted and might have gone directly to her hotel and crashed. However, by the time morning arrived, I had still to hear from her. I began to have this nagging concern in the back of my mind. I thought perhaps she was simply busy or her phone was on quiet, So I tried calling again and then texted her a few times. However, I was officially freaking out after a couple more hours of radio silence. In the end, I gave her sister a call to check whether she had heard from her. Nothing. I was really beginning to freak out by this point. I even went so far as to call her friends, who were meant to accompany her on the trip, in the hopes that perhaps her phone had malfunctioned or she just hadn't had time to check in. However, since they weren't traveling with her, they were also perplexed when I contacted them. Back at home, they were enjoying coffee while seated 2 streets away. It dawned on me then that she wasn't traveling with pals, wasn't on a girls' trip, and hadn't gone anywhere with anyone. She simply vanished. It seemed as though my stomach had fallen through the floor as I sat there with the phone. I was unable to comprehend it. Why would she tell me such a lie? Why wouldn't she notify me before leaving? I attempted to persuade myself that it was an error of some sort, such as perhaps she had missed a flight that connected or that she had been unable to contact due to an emergency. But I knew in my heart that she had this planned. Her stating "thank you for your support" and the entire girls' trip scenario were all components of whatever she had been imagining. I was at a loss for what to do. I couldn't wake up, as if I were living in a nightmare. I didn't marry this woman. I didn't even recognize this person. The coldness, the way she had stopped discussing our future, and those small digs about my appearance and health all began to make sense. I simply hadn't noticed, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to see, that she had been drifting away for a while. I just sat there looking at my phone that night, hoping for a call, a text, or anything else. However, nothing materialized, and I knew in my heart that it wouldn't. I remember lying there and staring at the ceiling when I woke up the following morning, thinking that it was all just a bad dream. But when she saw that her side of the bed was empty, reality set in. In fact, she had gone. She gathered her belongings and disappeared. The assurances I had given myself the previous evening, that perhaps she was late or her phone had died, were no longer valid. She had clearly planned this and wanted to go. I was completely in denial for the first few days. I would keep ringing her phone in the hopes of hearing her voice and perhaps receiving an explanation. I even left messages. I kept leaving them in the hopes that she would understand, even though I was half the time at a loss for words. However, I only received quiet, which strangely made things worse. I felt as like I had been a stranger to her the entire time and had been left to work it out on my own, without any clue as to what went wrong. Her family was initially just as surprised as I was. They hadn't heard from her, and her mother didn't know anything about her plans. In the end, I visited there more times than I could remember in order to speak with her mother and get answers. They must have felt sorry for me. When I couldn't bring myself to cook, her mom would prepare meals for me and occasionally let me stay there. She would sit there while I talked about all the tiny things that didn't make sense, attempting to figure out how my life had suddenly become so complicated. And to be honest, there were times when I was too numb to speak and just sat there in silence. I oscillated between rage, despair, and remorse. I would constantly ask myself what went wrong. Was there a sign I missed? Was I not paying enough attention to her? On certain days, I would review all of our arguments and conversations in an attempt to determine what caused her to leave. I kept thinking about what I could have done better and how I could have preserved our marriage. I realize this seems dramatic, but I was completely fixated on finding the solution, as if it would somehow make everything better. I hardly slept or ate, and my work also began to suffer. People would notice and inquire about my well-being, to which I would just respond that I was occupied with personal matters. Declaring aloud that my wife had abandoned me without saying a word was embarrassing. I eventually told a few close friends, and they tried their best to divert my attention by bringing me out to hang out and encouraging me to move on. However, I would still worry about her even when I was with them, wondering where she was and why I wasn't enough to keep her. The incessant inquiries from strangers, neighbors, relatives, acquaintances, and even former coworkers who had heard I was married, were among the worst aspects. "How's married life treating you?" And "How's your wife?" are the questions they would pose. It was always like pulling off a new scab. I would just smile and tell them that everything was good because I lacked the courage to tell them that she had left, but every time I uttered that lie, it seemed more weighty. The only thing that worked in the end was therapy. Although I had never gone before, I realized I couldn't manage it alone after a few months of hardly functioning. I thus located a therapist and began attending once a week. It was beneficial to speak with a neutral person who was unfamiliar with her, me, or any of our baggage. I would express my rage, betrayal, and the void she had left in my life. I would talk endlessly about the restless evenings and how I would lie awake repeatedly reliving everything. The therapist assisted me in realizing that she chose to leave, and it was her decision, not mine, and that there was no magical moment that would have kept her here. It was a difficult pill to take. I thought for a long time that I was flawed in some manner, which was why she had left me, but gradually I began to view things differently. I chose to overlook her long-standing coldness and distance, assuming that things would improve on their own. I persuaded myself that I could maintain my composure and that our marriage could be saved by my own efforts alone. The realization that it wasn't hurt. As time passed, I began to restore my life in tiny increments. It wasn't until she departed that I realized how much I had lost in our marriage. I had always been the one who tried his hardest to make sure she was content and that our home life was comfortable. However, I had a lot of free time now and was unsure of how to spend it. I therefore began resuming old pastimes that I had forgotten about. I tried cooking new meals, went to the gym, and started reading literature I had been putting off. Eventually, the work also improved. As I began to feel more like myself, I started to put more effort into my work, but at first I was just going through the motions and barely keeping up with my workload. I felt like I still had control over something in my life, which was one of the few things that gave me a sense of accomplishment. Although I had always been skilled at what I did, I now give it my all. The extra hours, the concentration. I got a promotion as a result of it, something I never would have obtained if I had been moping about my problems. Even yet, there were painful days. A picture, an old movie ticket stub, or other small items that brought back memories I tried to ignore would occasionally remind me of her. Looking at them, I would question her actions, whether she ever considered me, and whether she ever felt bad about what she had done. But gradually, those times began to disappear. I was able to let go of those memories a little more quickly and move on a little more easily each time. Additionally, I got back in touch with people I hadn't seen much of since getting married. We resumed our activities, including hiking and hitting the golf range, something I hadn't done in years. Having someone by my side who wasn't involved in the mess and could support me in moving on without pulling me back into the agony was a relief. In hindsight, I saw that I invested far too much of myself in that relationship, in being her spouse. I felt like I had lost a significant portion of who I was when she departed, as if she had taken a piece of me with her. But I was rediscovering who I was, piece by piece. Although it wasn't quick or simple, I was making progress. I was finally able to see someone who wasn't defined by her past actions when I looked in the mirror at the conclusion of that year. I wasn't just the man whose wife had abandoned him. I had rebuilt, I had survived, and I was stronger now. I felt as like I could truly live my life without her shadow looming over me for the first time in years. To be honest, I took pride in that. I believed I had moved on from everything. After all that chaos, life had at last begun to seem normal again. Or as close to normal as it could be. My work was going really well, my friends kept me occupied, and I had my routine down pat. Even my daily thoughts about her had stopped. Even while I still occasionally had flashbacks to odd memories, it wasn't as frequent as it used to be, when she was somehow involved in every part of my existence. She was therefore the last person I expected to see standing there when someone knocked on my door one Saturday morning. But there she was with a baby at my doorway. I went cold. It was like witnessing a ghost, and for a moment my brain simply stopped functioning. Though perhaps a touch worn down, she still had her typical appearance. She looked at me as if she genuinely believed that I would be delighted to see her. And yes, it really got to me because I had assumed I was no longer interested. As it happens, meeting her again evoked many feelings I had previously suppressed. At first, I just stood there and stared without saying anything. She asked, "Can I come in?" With no embarrassment after grinning at me as if nothing had happened. The nerve. Really, she just shows up here as if I should be welcoming her back with open arms after everything she's done. However, I maintained my composure and assured her, "No, you can stay there and explain." I didn't want her in my home, bringing all the craziness back into the one area I had created for me. Despite her somewhat disoriented appearance, she remained in her spot and began telling her story. "I know this might come as a shock, but I wanted to come back and explain everything," she said. She even had a hopeful expression on her face, as though she really thought I would be willing to listen to her. I was tempted to just close the door and laugh in her face, but I was too intrigued. I was curious about the reason behind her disappearance and what she had come up with. She continued by explaining that she had erred in leaving and that she had come to the realization that she had lost the greatest thing that had ever occurred to her. Not my words, but hers. She claimed to have thought a lot and to have finally realized what was important in life after having this child. After years of ignoring me, it seemed that what mattered most was unexpectedly knocking on my door. "This is our second chance," she remarked, glancing down at the infant. What I was hearing about our second chance was unbelievable. It sounded like we would just pick up where we left off, with this child acting as some sort of miraculous reset button. I was furious on the inside, but I attempted to maintain a neutral appearance. She continued by claiming she wanted us to be a family once more and that although she had made a horrible mistake, we could now start over as just the three of us. The one question that has been bothering me ever since she arrived was finally asked. "What made you go?" I tried to speak as steadily as I could, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could contain myself. Now that she was here, I needed to hear it from her since I had tortured myself with all the possibilities for years in an attempt to comprehend. After hesitating and glancing down at her feet as if embarrassed, she finally told me the truth, or at least what I thought it was. She acknowledged that she left because she wanted a child and had found someone who could provide one for her because I couldn't. She honestly stated it as if it were insignificant, as though she hadn't destroyed my life, and as though I should just nod and take it as gospel. She clarified that although the man she had left didn't stay, she had already given birth and knew she wanted me back by that point. As simple as that. Easy. I paused to think about what she was saying. Here she was confessing that she had left me, fled with a man, and had his child, and now expecting me to accept it, as if I would simply forgive and move on. "You went, met someone else, and had his baby, and now you think you can return and act as if nothing happened?" I asked her. She broke down in tears and apologized for her terrible error. However, I was completely unmoved by that. She kept talking about how she knew we were meant to be together and that I was the person she really loved. To be honest, maintaining a straight face was difficult. She sounded so naive that I was shocked. Her expression was one of desperation, not love, and I could see it. She then attempted to guilt-trip me by talking endlessly about how difficult it had been for her to be a single mother. In fact, she attempted to paint herself as the victim in all of this, acting as though her decisions hadn't brought her to this point. She assured me she was prepared to work things out this time and that she wanted my help. I couldn't stop wondering, who does she think I am? I listened to it all as I stood there, but I had had enough. I told her bluntly, "You have to live with the decision you made a long time ago. Here, there is no second chance." She appeared astonished, as if she had never even imagined that I would say no. As if she truly believed she could simply saunter back into my life because it would suit her. She became irate just when I thought she would finally understand and depart. She became angry with me, accusing me of selfishness and demanding that I give her another chance to make amends. She said that she could have taken half of everything and divorced me at that time if she had so desired. She even had the audacity to remark that the house should still belong to her. I felt a feeling of relief as I realized that I was now seeing her for who she truly was, as if her true colors were being revealed in front of me. I didn't raise my voice or quarrel with her. "We're done," I simply remarked, glancing at her. "You finally have the life you've always desired. I no longer have responsibility for this." I cut off any last statements she might have had by closing the door in her face. I was struck with a peculiar sense of serenity as I stood there and heard her muffled screaming coming from the other side of the door. She might shout, knock, weep, anything. However, I knew I would never allow her to return. The woman I had married and loved was no longer with me. This stranger, who believed she could pick up the pieces whenever it was convenient for her, took her position. Feeling lighter than I have in years, I moved away from the door and took a seat. I believed that was it after I shut the door behind her. I assumed she would understand and simply walk away. Instead though, She began pounding on the door and shouting various things. The nerve seemed unbelievable to me. She had the gall to stand there and insist that I listen to her while I was in the one place that was truly mine, the only place I had been able to recover from the disaster she had left me in. I initially considered ignoring it and letting her scream till she became weary. But then I started to wonder. I was curious to know what kinds of excuses she would offer this time. In order to let her know that I was paying attention, I slightly opened the door, but not enough to let her in. She appeared to be astonished that I hadn't given her the response she desired, as if she had just been slapped across the face. As if we were having a typical argument and not coping with her abandonment, she began a lengthy monologue in which she expressed her willingness to forgive me for closing the door on her and her want to start over. She went on and on about how if we both worked hard we could work things out. I was unable to contain my laughter at that moment. I actually laughed because this woman had more nerve than I had ever seen. When I did that, she appeared enraged, as if I should feel guilty for not paying attention to her. "You left," I informed her. "You tossed everything away while you had the chance. I won't just act as though nothing occurred just because you want to." She began repeating things like, "You don't understand how hard it was for me." As her cheeks flushed, she continued by talking about how she had been so lost after leaving and how she had discovered her error too late. However, I didn't believe it. I informed her that she had taken the decision to leave. She had plotted it, made up a falsehood about it, and then carried it out. Now her remorse meant nothing. She lost her temper at that point. Her entire tone shifted. She stopped the melancholy, repentant act and began to attack me, accusing me of unfairness and lacking the grace to give her another chance. In fact, she dared to declare, "I could have taken everything from you back then if I'd wanted to. I could have stolen half of your possessions." I simply stood in awe. This woman, who had abandoned me without saying anything, now believed she should be compensated in some way for not attempting to defraud me, as if she should be commended for not being as awful as she could have been. I said to her, "What the heck? Should I feel thankful that you simply left me without taking anything with you?" She looked at me with a mixture of fury and another emotion on her face, possibly desperation or remorse. But to be honest, I didn't give a damn by then. I had just finished. That was where all the years I had spent questioning myself, feeling bad, and wondering if I was somehow to blame for her leaving vanished. I felt as though the burden I had been bearing was finally lifted when I saw her for who she truly was. But she wasn't finished. She began to pace my porch while complaining that I would regret not giving her another chance and that I would never find someone like her. In fact, by refusing to take her back, she attempted to make me feel as though I was the one who was missing out. It was strange. As if I should be pleading with her to stay. Here she was, the one who ruined everything we owned. She became more louder and continued to complain about how I had forced her to leave in the first place when she realized I wasn't going to back down. She said that none of this would have occurred if I had been more understanding about the entire kid situation. Her reasoning seemed to indicate that I had failed her as a husband because I couldn't conceive, which somehow excused her from leaving to have a kid with someone else. The mental acrobatics were amazing. To be honest, I was shocked that she was attempting to blame me for her decisions. I bluntly told her, "Look, you could have told me the truth if you really wanted a child. When you were making plans to go, you didn't need to lie to me and act like nothing was wrong." She merely gazed at me as if I had smacked her, with nothing to say in response. However, I prevented her from speaking. I continued by telling her, "You have to live with the decision you made on your own. I have no problem with that." She made one final attempt, returning to her dejected expression, and urged me to consider the boy and how I was being unjust by ignoring him. As if I were the bad guy, she really used the child, who was in her arms, to guilt-trip me. However, I wasn't buying into it. "I don't know that child," I informed her. "I'm not involved with him. You are not mine, and neither is he." That was the end of it. I could see her coming to terms with it at last. She was aware that I would never change my mind and that I would never allow her to return to my life. I could see the rage waning and being replaced by something else, either genuine regret or simply exasperation. However, I didn't care. She had attempted to walk all over me and expected me to smile and give her credit, but now she was simply a stranger. For a few more seconds, She stood there as if she was waiting for me to decide to call her back. I didn't say anything else though. When it finally hit her that I meant every word, I just stood there and watched her expression. I closed the door without giving it another glance. I didn't wait for her to hit me again this time. In my heart I knew that I had already made up my mind and that there was no turning back. I don't know, but I left the door with the impression that I had finally prevailed. It was over, even though she had spent so much time hoping to return and use manipulation to get back into my life. I had freedom. Neither for her nor for us was there going to be another chance. She was now only a memory, one that I had at last relegated to the past. I felt like I could breathe again after all those years of suffering and shame. And what do you know, it was pleasant. I felt a peculiar calmness come over me as soon as I shut the door behind her. I no longer felt sad, furious, or even astonished. It was as though all of the remorse, guilt, and incessant wondering that I had felt for her over the years simply disappeared. I was prepared to move on since I had at last found the closure I didn't realize I needed. This time, it was truly over. Naturally though, things didn't go as well as I had intended. Her mother texted me a few days later. She apologized, stating she was embarrassed by her daughter's handling of the situation and that she had attempted to reason with her, but clearly it had failed. Her mother was a decent individual. She had been of great assistance to me since her daughter left, and I could see that she was truly distressed by the situation. Although I had nothing against her, I didn't want to be dragged back into that situation. I simply said, "Thanks for checking in," and that was my only response. I wasn't going to waste time justifying my choice, and I wasn't going to offer her mother any more information. She knew it was over because she understood. I learned tidbits over the course of the following few weeks via social media and mutual connections. She had apparently returned to living with her parents, and things weren't going well. The father of the child, the man she had left me for, had nothing to do with it. He had bailed out totally. She was left to figure things out on her own because, apparently, he hadn't committed to the long term. Few individuals were eager to help because she had essentially burned every bridge. Her former friends, who had supported me when she first vanished, didn't feel sorry for her. They weren't eager to get drawn back into her drama because they had all moved on. You can't hold them responsible. Her parents weren't too happy either. They didn't have enough money to sustain her and the child. I was aware of this since her father called me shortly after her mother texted me. Curiosity overcame me and I nearly didn't respond. He mentioned that they were having financial difficulties and implied that perhaps I could be of some assistance. He was courteous but straightforward. He continued talking about the infant and how difficult things were for them, saying, "We know you cared about her once." I listened courteously, but I couldn't help but giggle a little, not aloud but you get the idea, when he began to explain that his daughter only needed a little help to get back on her feet. I politely informed him that his daughter made her own decisions and that I was neither in a position nor in the right frame of mind to assist. Since he didn't pursue it further, I believe he understood the message. Her pals, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, began contacting me the next thing I knew. Some attempted to use the guilt angle, claiming that she was going through a difficult moment and that perhaps I could find it in my heart to give her another chance. She even had the audacity to say that the child needed a father figure and that I shouldn't allow my resentment stand in the way of my efforts to assist him. However, I refused to back down. I refused to allow anyone make me feel guilty for making my own decision at last. I had given that woman all I had after years of feeling inadequate, and she had tossed it all away. Instead of relying on me to save her, she should at least take responsibility for her decisions. The calls and messages gradually decreased in volume before ceasing completely. Everyone seemed to realize at last that I was serious, that I had moved on, and that I would not get ensnared again. That's when the true calm arrived. For the first time in years, my life seemed calm and normal. I had my friends, my job, and my routines. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms, so it wasn't a fancy, glamorous one, but it was mine. The irony is that I once again began to discover joy in the small things, which I had not given much thought to when I was married. I would read novels I had been meaning to read for years, cook my own food and take walks. It felt good to be free, and I understood that I could live my life as I pleased without anyone's approval. I wasn't always concerned about other people's happiness or approval, for once. I felt as though I had gradually regained my life. I occasionally encountered someone who knew us both, and they would inquire, "Hey, what happened with her?" I would shift the topic and respond in a succinct, courteous manner. I simply didn't want to keep going back to a chapter that was so obviously over. It wasn't that I was concealing anything. I had finally mastered the skill of leaving her in the past. When I last heard from her, things weren't going well. She was still jumping between her parents' house and friends' sofas after her welcome, and she was having trouble keeping a job. Every now and then, people I hardly spoke to would message me to say she was approaching everybody who would listen to seek for assistance. A few of them even implied that she hoped I might reconsider and decide to play father to her child after all. However, that was not going to occur. I had invested too much time and effort into regaining my life to ever consider taking that road once more. Simply because things didn't go as planned, I wasn't going to be her safety net or the person who picks up the pieces. Nothing was going to pull me back into that chapter. I was finished. Ultimately, I believe I received the necessary closure. She was now coping with the repercussions of her decisions. And me? It was the first time since the day she departed that I felt completely, truly free. I had had enough of her looming over my life. I was happy that I had moved on. Not in a grand theatrical sense, but quietly, contented. And what do you know? That was sufficient.